So first things first, gentlemen.
Yeah.
How are you?
We're good.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, love Amsterdam. Had a day off here yesterday, walked around, did a little bit of shopping, and just love the city.
Very good to hear. So before we get into everything you've been up to lately, I do want to jump back a little bit to the beginning, because the type of music that you make, I watched a documentary a couple of days ago about it. I think you were in it.
Oh, Rise
Which,
of the
Rise of the Synth.
Oh yeah, there's a little clip. Tyler wasn't in town, so I always have to put that disclaimer. I wasn't trying to cut him out or anything. Yeah, we're you know, there's a tiny bit of the interview.
But for both of you, when did the introduction to that type of music begin? What was that for you personally?
It's you.
There we go.
Go ahead.
I remember I was in London for some songwriting sessions back in 2011, and Drive had just come out, and I was like, I want to go watch that one. That feels cool. And I think on that same trip, one of the guys I was working with showed me a band called Future Cop from the UK, and I think I'd come across Time Cop as well. And so I went and watched Drive by myself, and I was like, whoa. It really made an impression. And I really dove into that whole genre and just found such kinship in the emotions of it. I felt like there was a freedom musically that you could do things you weren't allowed to do in pop music at that time. So that was my foray. And then the year later, I was in LA and I met Tyler. That's kind of how that came about.
Mm-hmm. Because before that point, what type of music were you trying to make? And even when you first met, did you have an idea of what type of music you wanted to make?
The first song that we did together was
We Move Forward.
Yeah, it was We Move Forward, but it wasn't in the synthwave world.
No, it wasn't. I had been listening to a lot of progressive house and complextro and sort of electronic music at the time, and that's why that song, it's on our first EP, Days of Thunder, that's why that song feels more kind of housey. And I went back and tweaked the drums a little bit to make it less sort of hard house, and we retrofitted it. But the next song we did was, we wrote the chorus for Gloria the same day, and then it sat around for about a year, and then we came back a year later and wrote the verses. You had the verses, and so it wasn't, nothing was a plan, but it always was and has always been a case of, well, this is fun. You want to play with this? This feels fun. And so exploring little corners of the world and corners of the internet and genres, that's sort of the fun of it.
Yeah, because one thing that's kind of shown through the documentary is that the type of music came up very grassroots, in a very grassroots way. Just on the internet, people try to hide their faces, and then it's a very sub-genre or subculture that slowly began to flourish in more of a mainstream way. So at the outset, did it feel like you're trying something that was kind of risky, or that was kind of just for a subset of people?
It never felt risky to me. It felt fun and new and exciting, and we were obviously by no means the first to do it. There were lots of people that came before us, and so I feel like what I love about the community, we're building on each other's success, and it's really it's beautiful to see. But from my point of view, and I feel like we both were just like, well, this is weird and fun and cool, and we both grew up in the 80s, and so we kind of came at it from different vantage points, because I grew up in Scandinavia, Tyler grew up in the South, but we both grew up in the 80s, so it's the same language, whatever style it is, same language. And so for me, I was like, oh, I can do this in my sleep, in the meaning, not from an arrogant standpoint, but knowing the genre, knowing what I grew up on and what I love. It's like, I get to do this. This is incredible.
It's natural. It's kind
natural.
of first language.
First language, yeah.
And I think that there were around 2012 to 2015, there were a lot of music technologies that were coming out that had a lot of these presets in them. So a lot of bedroom producers were making this kind of sound as their first foray into music production. And I think we just had a leg up because we'd both been in the music industry for a while. and we were, you know, professionals, whatever that means, trying to do this thing. And I think it became popular because it was a really fun kind of music to make if you didn't know a lot about music production.
Yeah, it really is a genre that lends itself to bedroom producers. Sure. You know, you don't need a lot. You can add to the mix and the quality, and we've certainly done that through the years, and I've become better at mixing and stuff. But you can download for free a bunch of 80s drum machine samples and some free synths, and you could be off for $50. You could be off with a basic little synth. You could be off to the races and make it sound like the 80s very easily. And so it's a very easy point of entry. Now that also means that there's a lot out there that sort of sounds very similar and has the same colors and stuff. But that's how genres are created, and I think that's the beauty of it. It's very inclusive, and we love that community.
But with the music, why do you think, and maybe this is a silly question, but why do you think it resonates so much with people? Because for myself, for instance, I was born in '86, so I didn't consciously live through the '80s, yet it hits something in my soul. I don't know what.
You said consciously, right? I think that's the main word, is that when you were, you know, 4 or 5, this was what was playing in the supermarket. This was just the kind of wallpaper of your lived experience, but you weren't aware of it.
Sure.
And I think that's kind of the secret.
That's the key. You're right.
Is that it slips up on you. It's something that you are familiar with. The Lindrum, the gated snare, the DX7 sounds, the CS80. These are things that live in us without us realizing it. And I think Tim's brilliance is just being able to coax those moments out in an authentic way.
And then I think you also, in the documentary, you made a solid point, I think, in saying it wasn't just the 80s, the early 90s is kind of, because when I was watching TV, all those 80s movies, that's what I was watching, but it was in the 90s. So.
Yeah, totally. And stuff that came out, and especially from movies and stuff that came out in the early 90s was most likely produced in the late 80s. So it all bleeds into each other. We've never been so rigid. I love anything that's from the, love movies from the 80s and especially 90s lately. There was the movie making from that time had a special tone, and the way they looked, shot on film, of course. And I'm very inspired by that whole aesthetic. But you're right, stuff that was made in the 80s came out in the 90s. So it's all still of that time,
Sure. And what do you make then of this idea of nostalgia and kind of longing for that time? Maybe it's, and I don't want to make it too philosophical, but maybe it's just
let's get philosophical.
But maybe it's just a hunkering for when times were good when you were a kid. Maybe it's as simple as that, but how do you see it?
I think it is. My point, I'll let Tyler speak up, but my point of view, I think that's one big element. But I think also we are in such a digital age now where we really we're longing for a more tactile experience, things you can, that's why vinyl has suddenly had this resurgence, because it's something you can feel now, and VHS and even DVDs are nostalgic now to people. And so I think there's something about a media, and I love analog photography. I'm not very good at it, but I love the idea of, you kind of have to capture the moment, and you can't just fix it with a filter, or you could scan it, but the whole point of that is, you capture a moment and it's uncontrollable, and in a way it's sort of ineffable. But that for me is how I see it, and why even people that didn't grow up in that, they were born in the 90s or early 2000s, and they find themselves longing for an era they didn't even exist in. There's something there, I think, and obviously a lot of that could be due to how that era is portrayed in media, and obviously everything is glamorized in a way, and I think synthwave is a good example of, it's sort of what we wanted the 80s to be, and so that there is a sort of a kind of a dreamlike quality to it as well. But I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, I think its power lies in a quest for origins, trying to discover where you came from. I think humanity's always trying to get back to that first cause. And people who were born in the 80s and early 90s, that this was something to return to. And as I get older, the more nostalgia hits me. There's some in Atlanta where I live now. Was a classic radio station. Sorry, a modern radio station in the early '90s called 99X. It was Kurt Cobain and the Foo Fighters and Smashing Pumpkins. And it went away for 10 years, and now it's back. And I listen to it all the time in my car. And it's the same playlist. It was exactly the same. And it puts me back into the mindset of me as a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old discovering the world. So I think it's a quest for origins, to go back and uncover some things about yourself.
Yeah, one thing I find interesting, especially about how this music kind of rose to prominence in a way, is first it was excavated on the internet in a way, and everybody had to look for it, and it was difficult to sound. But then slowly it became more available. And one thing that you guys did, which I think is really good, at least for the type of music that you make, is to perform it live as well. So there's a certain connection for the audience to it, and a place to go to enjoy that music together.
True.
So what was the thought process behind, because a lot of those artists, they just stayed in their room and never came out, so what was the reasoning for you to want to share it with people?
We tried to stay in our room.
We tried, yeah. We were very comfortable in our bedroom. It wasn't so much a conscious, like, we should take the show on the road, it wasn't, because it's extremely expensive to tour. It's extremely technically challenging, and when we started, Tyler has been a solo artist way before I met him in his own right, and I come from the kind of studio world of just producing for other people. So honestly, it was never really, when we did our first 2 EPs, it was never really like, how can we do this live? It was more, how can we do this live? We can't, I didn't even know about how to execute that, and we didn't have money to hire a musical director so it kind of happened, long story short, someone from a club in San Francisco kept reaching out, and it really didn't make sense financially at the time, but then we were able to figure out where the first show we played was with FM84, another synthwave band. We love those guys. And it was like, well, maybe we can co-headline, and it's not like we're gonna make a bunch of money, but maybe, Tyler can fly from the East Coast and I'll drive up from LA to San Francisco, and we all kind of made it, and then people showed up, and we didn't know what it was gonna, and it sold out, that show, and we were like, what? And that was the first moment where we saw the real faces, and people, I had been talking to on social media and kind of just seeing their handles on Twitter and stuff like that. So that was, when we played that show, I think we all were like, whoa. And then we did the same in LA, and then we got a great manager, and we signed with booking agents, and that's where we had more of an infrastructure to be able to kind of build it. And it's been a growth, it's been independent from day one, and in many ways still is. So it's been a very slow build and a slow climb, but it continues to evolve, and it's really exciting to see where it goes.
Yeah.
So can I assume you were quite used to the stage, and for you less so?
Less so. I grew up playing drums when I was a kid in bands and stuff, but when I was in my late teens, I came across someone sitting and working on Cubase on a 1997 Macintosh. I was like, what's this? and I loved the idea I could be my own band, and so that was my first foray. And then I was like, I want to be a producer, and so from then on, I let go of the drums, and I really pursued the production angle, but that took a long time, from when I started producing in 98, 97, 98, till the Midnight became the thing. That was honestly, before we could really make a living, was when I was like 37,
Okay.
20 years, so.
What do you think, and maybe this is a good one for you, Tyler, what do you think makes the collaboration between the two of you so fruitful, and kind of the way you do your own thing, but kind of do it together as well?
Yeah. Tim and I, our strength is that we see the world in different ways. I think he is a perfectionist, and I think that I am just thrown against the wall. So I feel like rough drafts are easy, and I think Tim is just doggedly.
Why would you have to ask this question?
I think Tim is great, like chasing down the feeling. He really and he adds a polish that if I had another creative partner, it just wouldn't work in the same way. So he also, he handles the production and the vibe and the sonic scape, and I handle the lyrics, and it works that there's a tiny sliver in the middle, that there's not a lot of real estate that we're like, well, this kick drum is just not going to work. We've never had a fight about a kick drum.
No, we've never. But and I would add to that what Tyler's immensely amazing at. I love to create universes, sonic universes, but what Tyler brings is a thematic soundscape and some storytelling and making it all cohesive in lyrics and melodies, and we sort of both ping pong with melodies, but that's very much his world, and I'll just pick up what he's doing and pivot it a little bit up from a production standpoint or from a producer's point of view, kind of tighten things up or send him in a direction or whatever, and it's a fun ping pong, and we just seem to kind of what's it called? What's the word?
Synergy or?
Well, yeah, we seem to. I was going to say accompany each other. That's not the right word. But
complement
each other. That was the word I was looking for. Yeah, in a nice way, and so there's a fun journey there, and it's always a little bit new and fresh. Like whenever we get together to do something, like, what are we going to do now? After every record, and we're kind of in that space now, which is really fun.
But I think what's great about both of us is that we're kind of naturally curious. We're curious about different things, I think, fundamentally, but it's that sort of like we're detectives trying to chase something down, and that something is in a lane that is not what either of us expected. It's somewhere else, and that's what keeps it fresh for me, and I hope that translates to the fans as well.
Yeah, and I think ping pong, it's very much a reciprocal.
Reciprocal.
Yeah. Reciprocal.
Oh yeah.
Thing where I can imagine you write some music, you get inspired for some lyrics, or the other way around. So, the first initial ideas, are those difficult to find? Because I can imagine, and then it can be thematically as well. Do you kind of know beforehand what direction you want to go in, or is it just an open canvas?
I have an Evernote app where I store all my lyrical ideas, and I checked the other day, and over the last 10 years I've averaged one idea a day. So there's always a well to pull from, and that kind of has to be the case because the songs come from all sorts of different directions. I can't sit down and go, okay, it's time to write a midnight song. The midnightness needs to happen in the editing process for me. And I think that's why my sort of scattershot approach and Tim's sort of honing, focused approach is really good for this project.
Because I wrote a couple of lyrics down, maybe we can get into them. One I find very interesting, Golden Gate, you say a Springsteen song a whole life long. I really like that lyric.
Thank you.
What made you think of that?
We were leaving New York, and a lot of my friends were leaving New York as well, and they bought a house in the suburbs or moved to New Jersey or moved back home to wherever they come from, and that's, you kind of understand that's for good, kind of. It's like this is the house, the starter home that we're going to put our memories in and raise our family, and yeah, it's sort of a transitional time where you recognize that this is starting the longer journey.
Right. Yeah. And then the other one, because this one was just a quick one I find funny, but in Heroes, a year closer to my death, I still haven't found what I'm looking for yet. Yeah. And as a collective, the two of you, I don't know where that line came from, but is that true for the music as well, that it's a continual journey in a way?
Yeah, I think that's true. For me, at least, it should be a continuous journey. That's what keeps it fun and fresh. But I don't know where that line comes from.
Yeah. It's funny, I have been reading a book called High Weirdness about sort of the culture of the 70s. And there's a perpetual discovery of the self outside. You know, you're like trying a new philosophy, or you're trying a new culture, or you're trying new food, you're trying a new language on, and it's like the self is somewhere out there to be discovered. And there's a point, usually when you're young, when that's extremely helpful. And then at some point you're like, oh, I kind of know who I am. I know, you sink in, you invest in this. But yeah, Heroes is kind of mid-pandemic going, where's the answer? It's not love, it's not money. Where in the search does the thing exist?
No, but that's an interesting point. And for the both of you, then, what role does music play in finding happiness?
I think music is magic.
Yeah.
I think it's really one of those things that is ineffable and is. I have a friend who's a magician, and when you're a magician, the magic is a trick. It's a sleight of hand. You're being tricked as an audience member. But with music, it is magic. It's the real magic, and the audience gets to participate in the way that they want to, and we get to participate in the way that the whole thing is magic. So I don't know what to say beyond that, but yeah, there's a lot of mastery to be learned. There's different styles, different genres, different ways of doing things and flipping things, and the sandbox is infinite.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because sonically on Heroes you try to do things a little bit differently. So Tim, maybe from your perspective, what was the approach? Did you have an idea of what you wanted for this next project? And as you mentioned, now you are in a similar boat where you have to think about what comes next. So how does that process go?
Heroes was made during the pandemic, conceived of, and as the last part of the sort of kids trilogy. Mm-hmm. And we went through a long journey to kind of end up where we ended up. Stylistically, the feel and the sound, we were exploring grunge and blog house and emo and 90s, and then ultimately it had to sort of be a statement of inclusivity and kind of inviting everyone to the party of the songs. Mm-hmm. and there was a heart we wanted to put out there. Mm-hmm. It had to be an earnest record in that sense, and we ended up settling on the big sort of anthemic stadium rock songs of the 80s and the 90s, listening a lot to Def Leppard, and me going down countless rabbit holes of interviews with the engineer from Mutt Lange who produced all those records, and Bryan Adams, and really kind of trying to like learn all the little techniques. And so I adopted a lot of that and kind of really tried to nail that, just because it's fun for me. I love doing that, and I grew up on that stuff. But then now it's fun. I can feel myself returning back to the really heavy electronic roots, very melodic electronic roots. But it's always fun. I realize when I look back that tonally our records seem to kind of vacillate between, Endless Summer was bright and sunny, and then this Nocturnal was darker and heavier and moodier, and then Kids was bright and optimistic, and Monsters was moody and brooding, and then Heroes was big and anthemic, and so now I guess we'll see where we go.
Last question then.
Yeah.
Because this ties into kind of the whole rise of synthwave music. Where do you see the music going? Because if you listen to bands like The Weeknd and that kind of stuff, I mean, it's pervasive in pop music already. Yeah. So do you see it even growing, and then acts like yourself kind of how should I put it? Toe in the line, is that it? No, that's not the way you say it. But kind of groups like you kind of being at the forefront and kind of championing this type of music.
Yeah, I don't know that we look at it as if like, well, here we are. We've got to really carve the way for all the little guys.
I don't mean it in kind of. You invented the type of music, but since you are playing live and people get to see you and get to go to your concerts, I think as I mentioned, I think that's very important so people have a place to go to.
It's huge, and we feel, honestly, we had a talk about this the other day. It's sort of, someone asked us something and we were talking about it, and it's hard for us to step out and we see the growth when people show up at shows and we're like, this is incredible that they care enough to, we just played Paris at a very legendary, iconic venue, and I think it holds 1,500 people, and to imagine that people in Paris around the world care enough to come out on a, whatever that was that Wednesday night, 1,500 people, and it was an incredible show, incredible crowd. They were so generous and gave us so much love, and we feel that, we give it back, and that's not, we never take that for granted. And so I think it's just always, it really puts things in perspective and makes you feel extremely humble and appreciative, and that people continue to show up. And so that's a gift. Yeah. And we try to always let the music guide us and not try to go, well, now we've got to make this because this is what the people want, it should always start with the spark inside. And I think that's important, to respect the fans enough to chase our own, to keep it fresh for them, for us. Otherwise, we're not doing this journey justice.
That's right. That's right. Otherwise, it's just kind of an attempt to capture something that was alive once. It's now not anymore. It's like putting something under glass and trying to. It's like making music in a vacuum. What is fun is to kind of follow the river and follow the journey and stay with it.
And let go of the oars, let the stream carry you.
Yeah, let's see where we end up then.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.